I'm Luke Kelly, and I'm the founder of the Line and Length movement, dedicated to ripping the covers off mental health stigma. After a rough spell with my mental health, I contacted a large number of mates to come together to play a game of cricket with a very unique point of difference. In between innings, a supportive platform was provided where those who felt comfortable showing some vulnerability openly spoke about their personal mental health journey. Thus, the Line and Length movement was born. While we are not mental health experts on this podcast, we are always here to support. So if you or anyone you know is feeling a bit flat, please have a talk to the experts like Lifeline, Beyond Blue, or a medical professional. Today's episode is sponsored by Picker Financial Solutions. The support that Justin Picker is providing will go a long way in assisting the Line and Length movement in ripping the covers off mental health. While we here at Line and Length focus on mental health, Picker Financial Solutions can help you with your financial health. And now, on to this week's episode of This Is Your Line and Length.
G'day team. I'm your host Aiden. Welcome to this episode of This Is Your Line and Length. Joined here by the regular Kels. How are you today, mate?
I'm good, thanks, Aiden. Yeah, really well. Good to have this guest Rhys on the show. It's going to be a cracking episode, this one.
We've got our special guest Rhys Binney in this week. Rhys, how are you, mate?
Oh, very well, thank you. All the better for seeing you guys. I'm pretty pumped to be here as well. So, just really stoked at what you're doing here.
Cheers, we love hearing that. Thanks, we just love it.
We're absolutely excited by it. Now, Rhys, before we dive into all the heavy stuff that we love to talk about on this podcast, why don't you let our listeners know who is Rhys Binney?
Oh, such a bold question.
Big guns early.
Yeah, just a bloke, really. I've been a follower of what you guys are doing for a little while. I've heard about Line and Length for a bit, and I'm sort of pretty stoked to be involved. I'm someone with some lived experience around mental health, which we can get into in a little bit. And, I found that to be obviously a journey of pretty serious ups and downs, but, one that I feel like I've learned a lot from, and I'm pretty happy to sort of share some of that. For work, I'm a senior vice president of growth strategy for a technology company. And before that, sort of been in consulting, had a bit of an unusual background, plenty of time in sort of the business world in mostly consulting type roles. And prior to that, I worked in counterterrorism and unconventional warfare for a while, mostly in the academic space, so teaching and publishing and stuff like that. Outside of that, played too many sports to keep up with. I've got a garage and a truck full of just equipment that I often don't use. And I live on Sydney's northern beaches, so nice part of the world.
I imagine
how'd we go?
Listeners can agree with that. What sort of unconventional sports are we talking, mate? Like anything sort of super out there?
Yeah, there's a few things. So I started getting into ocean swimming a few years ago, and I've done a few like half decent swims. And a mate of mine and I have got a shared 20K swim, so we'll do 10Ks each coming up sort of next year, which should be good fun. And then I went down a path of ultra running a couple of years ago. So I signed up to a couple of silly ultra distance races. The first race I signed up to was about 100Ks, and then I got injured and figured I'll sign up for a 300K race. And so I've been doing that ever since. And then I get carried away, and I'll decide I want to go rock climbing for 6 months at a time, or, just go off sort of adventuring and doing these long multi-day hikes through the bush and stuff like that as well. So a bit of a mixed bag. It's mostly around that adventure and endurance space. I'm pretty rubbish at coordination, to be honest, guys. You'll figure that out pretty quickly on a cricket pitch. So I'll stick to the push yourself really hard for a long time space.
Can I just confirm that you said 300 kilometers?
Yeah, so there's a racing format in the ultra long distance community called stage racing. So what that race was effectively 7 days of running ultra distance marathons back to back. So you might do 50 Ks a day. There's a long day that's about 80. I didn't actually complete the race because I was incredibly unprepared. But I made it through about 160 Ks before my body kind of called it quits. And once I'd come back to the land of the living, I was just hooked on it. And I've been sort of, going out and getting after that kind of stuff ever since. Not so much through COVID, but still doing the training and enjoying myself.
What sort of preparation do you do for like a 300K run? Like I struggle with about 5Ks. I can't comprehend 300.
Yeah, there's a few key differences which I wish I knew beforehand. No, a lot of it actually does come down to really good preparation and testing things out. And I'm no expert. Like I show up and crawl across the occasional finish line and I'm usually okay at running across the start line, but the rest of it is a bit of a mixed bag. But a lot of it comes down to preparation. You look at the people who are good at this and they are just so squared away in terms of their kit, their food. They're really specific about their training and getting enough mileage into their legs. So, if someone's running a 160K race, they may well be doing, 160 Ks a week on average for a few weeks leading up to that kind of race. So a lot of it is just experience. One of the biggest things that I learned was that first race where I was pulled out because of medical issues. Effectively, I was so severely dehydrated and had pretty severe heat stroke to the point where I was hallucinating and pretty much incoherent. But I learnt a tremendous amount, and then that went straight into my training, and I came back and I got a coach who sort of helped me through that process. So a lot of it is learning by trial and error. The people who do, who graduate into that sport the right way, typically kind of go through, they might run a marathon and then they run a 50K and then an 80K, and they just sort of build up that knowledge base as they're going. I went a ridiculous way and kind of went straight to 300Ks, but it allowed me to fail massively with a big goal, and I probably ran further. I ran 160Ks in my first race across 3 days, whereas, if I had just signed up for a 50K, at best I would have, run 50Ks. So for me, that approach worked, but then I had to go straight back like everybody else to go, how do I build up to this? How do I learn what needs to be done? And frankly, how do I leave my ego at the door and realize that I can't just gut it out for this kind of race? Like I need to know how nutrition works. I need to know how my body, like what's actually happening in my body at those distances. And so that was a big ego deflation moment for me, which was, absolutely warranted and a really valuable learning experience. But there's always a bit of a sting with those kinds of things.
Rhys, there's obviously an incredible amount of self-discipline that is shown in these sports. Is that something that you've incorporated into your life, a self-discipline aspect?
Yes, by necessity, to be honest. So I'm like the least disciplined bloke out there, hey. Naturally, discipline is not my friend. I was never friends with the disciplinarians in school or any other kind of, environment that I've been exposed to. I hate getting told what to do. Naturally, I'd gravitate away from structure and, I kind of just wing things and, I'm off with the fairies a little bit. And that hasn't led to great outcomes for me. So I had to really learn discipline over time. And eventually I was able to realize that, discipline allows me to actually have the freedom that I've been seeking so much. I thought freedom was basically not getting told what to do and doing whatever the hell you wanted at any time you wanted. And that to me didn't, it didn't give me what I wanted. It didn't actually give me freedom. I ended up trapped in a pretty bad place with drugs and alcohol and other things because of that lifestyle. So I had to find a way to impose some discipline upon myself. And I use a lot of strategies. I use a huge amount of outside support in order to achieve that. And I keep doing it because it keeps working. My life keeps getting better and I keep getting more freedom because of that discipline. But it certainly isn't something that came naturally to me. That's only started developing in the last few years.
It's an incredible thought that discipline equals freedom. I can't say that I've really heard that before, but I like it. I like what you're about there.
Yeah, I mean, I can't take full credit for it. There's a brilliant book by a bloke called Jocko Willink, who was a US Navy SEAL, and he sort of talks extensively about that. But it had the same effect on me. I heard that, and suddenly all of these things that were happening in my life made sense. It suddenly made sense that all of these points of structure and discipline that I was suddenly being exposed to, that were having such positive impacts, that there was that direct correlation. So I can empathize with the sort of mind-blowing nature of that, but I can't take credit for it. It's a better man than me.
Rhys, you alluded to at the beginning and sort of just then that you went through a little bit of a dark phase there with both alcohol and drugs. Would you mind sharing your experiences with us?
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose, look, I can probably take you back a little bit if you can indulge me for a moment, because mental health, mental health has been something that hasn't necessarily been a linear journey for me. It wasn't like I was cruising along all fine one day and then things went wrong and then they came back to being all good. So, if I look back at my childhood and things like that, and I don't have a lot of memories from it, but, I was a pretty sensitive kid. I liked nature and that kind of stuff. I liked people being nice to each other and fairness and those types of things. But I just never felt comfortable, all through being a kid, being a teenager. I had a very blessed upbringing. I grew up between Sydney's northern beaches and the North Shore. Always had sort of my needs met. I've got a very loving family, 2 parents still together, great relationships at home and all of those kinds of things. But I just never felt okay. And I learned also pretty quickly, I think as a boy and then as a man, you learn pretty quickly that sometimes being sensitive, that attracts some attention. And I was never sort of extensively bullied or anything like that, but I learned pretty quickly to hide that side of myself and to start wearing masks and, to put on the facade of being a lot tougher than I am and, all of those types of things. And I just remember a general sort of sense of unease. And when I got into my sort of middle teens, and then particularly into my later teens, alcohol and later on, drugs came onto the scene. And I don't remember the first time I got drunk and sort of thinking, this is mind blowing, but very, very quickly I accelerated to realize that took all of that discomfort away. I didn't feel awkward. I didn't feel like I couldn't talk to girls or I was going to say the wrong thing or that I didn't fit in or any of these other things. And I should point out, I did fit in. Like, I had friends and all of that. This was all going on inside me. It wasn't actually in line with reality. And so if you're uncomfortable all the time and you're in pain a lot of the time and you find a solution, you use that solution. And drugs and alcohol were a very, very effective solution. Around the same time, I found myself in increasingly violent situations. I got jumped once at school by a bloke who had his own issues going on, and I froze. And I hated that feeling of freezing in that situation. And I kind of vowed internally at that point never to let that happen again. And for the next few years, right through to sort of 19, 20, and a little bit later on, I didn't freeze. And I basically fought anybody who had a go at me, which, you know, at that time of your life is a lot of people. And so between the alcohol sort of abuse every weekend and the violence, and, you know, at one point I was getting knocked out pretty much on a weekly basis, you know. I'd always end up fighting blokes that were much bigger than me or much better at fighting as well. So that didn't help. But eventually I had my first real brush with a mental health challenge, and that was effectively the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. What it looked like for me is 6 months without sleep. The only way I could sleep was to drink until I passed out, or to stay awake all night and read until morning, because if I went to sleep, I'd have such horrendous nightmares and flashbacky type things that really knocked me around. So, you know, I was incredibly lucky. My mum's a mental health nurse, or was a mental health nurse. Was because she's retired, not because she's passed on. And she recognised the warning signs, and she sort of intervened, and she got me to go and see someone and talk through that. And I was very, very lucky. After about a year, or just shy of a year, I was able to get to a point where those symptoms had disappeared, and I wasn't having the sort of trauma-related symptoms, but the drinking progressed, and it just stayed there. And as I think most young guys and most young people can relate to, the drinking culture is there, so you can normalize a lot of behavior, and that's what I did. And what happened for me was a very, very slow acceleration of what I now know to be alcoholism, looking back. And so what was, a Friday and a Saturday night turned into a Thursday and a Friday and a Saturday night, and then Sundays, and then, Wednesday evenings, I wouldn't maybe get drunk, but I might have 8, 9, 10 beers and be okay, which is not great. And during this period, the thing that kind of kept me from thinking that I had such a big drug and alcohol problem was the fact that I had all the stuff on the outside. I had girlfriends, I had cars and motorbikes and all of that kind of jazz. I had good jobs paying me decent money. I had respect and all of that kind of thing. And I just thought that an alcoholic was someone who lays on a park bench. I knew what they were, but I thought that was all that they were. And I've come since to realize that those people, they often are alcoholics and drug addicts, but they're not the only ones. And many of them, are fantastic people who have a lot going on. I got to a point where I couldn't get through a week without drinking and using cocaine, mostly multiple days. I never drank and used every day, but that's purely because I physically couldn't. I was so burnt out. Excuse me. I'd be so burnt out that I couldn't keep going, and I needed a few days off, and I would swear I would never do that again. And then come Wednesday or Thursday, I'd be back on it. And it took me to, I had bad things happen. I got done for DUI, high range DUI. I'd had the fights, I'd had the relationship breakdowns, and there was nothing else left outside that could have been a rock bottom moment. I mean, I remember laying in a hospital bed at one point, and the guy said, "I think you might have diabetes," and I went, "I fucking hope I've got diabetes, because it means I've got a reason to stop drinking." And I didn't. I was coming down from too many drugs and too much alcohol from a multi-day bender, and that was what was going on. And I woke up on the 19th floor of an apartment that I lived on, and my bed was 10 feet from the edge of the balcony, and I knew that if I got out of bed, I would jump off the edge. There wasn't a doubt in my mind. I just knew that if I got up, I just wanted it to end. I wanted out. And I, as you can probably guess from the fact that I'm sitting here, I stayed in bed that day. And I remember a glimmer of hope that just said, there has to be a way out of this. And I sought help about 2 days later when I could kind of function again. And I went and I told a bunch of people who are also addicts and alcoholics that I just couldn't keep going, and I didn't know how to stop. And they listened to me and they understood what I was going through because they'd been through it themselves. And I basically kept asking for help every day since then. And it wasn't linear. I had periods of sobriety and then I had periods of convincing myself I was fine and going back and drinking and using again. But I always found myself in some variation of that place on a 19th floor, sort of, not in a very happy place, obviously. And eventually it took. I was so sick, I was so tired of feeling that way, that I was able to let go and just say, look, really commit to just like, I need help. I need people to work with me. I need to say this every day. And I need to do things, and I need to put my recovery from drugs and alcohol before anything else. And it hasn't all been picture perfect since then. I mean, early sobriety was hard. And there was a lot of emotions that, 12 years of drinking, drug use and violence had kind of dug down. I could express anger, but that was about the only emotion that I knew how to deal with. But I kept going through that, and I had a tremendous amount of support from family, from friends, from external sources. And I got to a point, which is where I'm at now in my life, where I don't feel uncomfortable in my own skin anymore. I can look in the mirror and be proud of who I see. I'm okay in myself, and I don't have that uncomfortability. All the other stuff, career and all of that all skyrocketed as you might expect, but that doesn't mean anything compared to that internal transformation of going from I'm not okay to, yeah, I have a place in this world and I belong. And that's how I get to feel every day now. So I'm incredibly grateful for that. I'm grateful for the journey. I wouldn't wish parts of that journey on anybody, but there are heaps of people out there going through that. But what's come on the other side of that journey has just been phenomenal, and because of that, my life's awesome today. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to share with you guys, just because I'd love others to experience that.
I cannot fathom in words how much I appreciate just hearing that story and how much that's going to benefit so many lives. Just your honesty and your vulnerability shown just then sharing your lived experience. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. So, Rhys, I thank you just for that bit, that vulnerability.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
I've got to echo that as well, mate. It's incredibly brave of you to be able to sort of stand up and not only say that you're not okay, but share an incredibly personal matter like that. And hopefully that also can help other people open up as well if they're feeling comfortable. Rhys, I've got a bit of a question. Right at the beginning, you said you always felt like you didn't belong, or you always felt uncomfortable. There's always a sense of unease. Looking back on that now, are you able to sort of put, like, was that anxiety? Are you able to put something to that?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly am prone to occasional bouts of the symptoms of anxiety and depression. I've never been diagnosed formally with either, but I think it would be pretty remiss of me not to think that I've certainly got that propensity. And in knowing a lot of other people who have been through sort of similar journeys, anxiety, depression, they're very, very common sort of elements. But to tell you the truth, I don't know where that comes from. I've spent time asking that question of why why me? Why do I feel this way? What's gone on? Has there been some sort of trauma? And there has been traumatic instances for sure. And, I think a lot of other people who have had problems with drugs and alcohol have some level of traumatic instance. It doesn't have to be, going to war or something extreme like that. Quite often they're smaller things, but they have that traumatic impact. But to be honest, I got to a point where I was like, it doesn't matter why that was there. I've never been able to find a concrete answer. What eventually was a much more important question for me to ask is, what are you going to do now? Like, what are you going to do about it? And why that was so valuable for me is it transformed me from thinking in terms of, why me, a bit of a victim's mentality. And I don't say that in a harsh or judging way. It's just, for me, that's what that thinking pattern allowed, to being able to take a bit more ownership and say, look, some bad things have happened. And yeah, it sucks that maybe in your childhood you felt uncomfortable, even though things were pretty, idyllic around you. But how are you going to live your life now? What are you going to do now? And where are you going to at what point do you take accountability and responsibility and say, I'm not responsible for my mental health challenges. I'm not responsible for, the illnesses that I might have, be it addiction, PTSD, or anything else. But I am responsible for my recovery, and to try and do everything that I can to get better and to be a better person. And overwhelmingly, that requires me, when I go through that process, to ask for help time. And I have to do it all the time now. And I still don't like it, I still don't want to ask for help. Sometimes I'll dilly-dally around for a couple of days and just sit in my own misery before I do it, and then immediately feel better. But, taking that sort of ownership over what will I do next, that made a big difference for me. The uncomfortability it just is a part of who I was, and it's still a part of who I can be at times, but nowhere near what it was.
Rhys, what does asking for help look like for you?
I needed to go and seek out support from people who had experienced what I'd experienced. I needed to speak with and get to know people who knew what it was like to only feel comfortable when they were drinking or using drugs. I needed to understand people who had the same experience of when they started drinking, they couldn't stop, or they eventually couldn't stop, or they went way too far. And I needed to hear those stories from other people. So that was one avenue that I sought out. For people who are like me, there are avenues such as 12-step programs that allow for that. There's rehabs. There's lots of different ways to get sober or to address these challenges. Other areas was talking to my family and talking to my mates. I had a couple of days after that experience on the 19th floor, I called a mate and I just said, look, I'm really struggling. Here are the steps that I'm taking, but I just need you to know that I'm in trouble. And he asked me a question which I'll never forget, which is, are you currently thinking about taking your own life? And I said no, honestly, but I told him about that, the experience from a few days before.
Yep.
And that question really, really helped me because someone didn't shy away from asking it. So that's sort of what I mean by asking for help. But there was an awesome, it must have been a government advert or something like that a few years ago about smoking, and it said, don't quit quitting. Yeah. And I kind of held on to that a little bit. I just went, just do, like, this fails, okay, this fails, okay. Like, eventually something will stick if you don't quitting, or if you don't stop asking for how I can be better. And I think that could probably apply to any kind of challenge in this space, mental health, not just alcoholism and drug addiction.
Hey, we've had a lot of guests on the podcast who often say that, once they reach out for help, it's a lot easier. But before that, they genuinely have the feeling that they're going to be a burden to their friends or their family or their support network. Is that something that you experienced through what you were going through?
Oh, 100%. And on occasion, it's something I still experience, but to a much, as you say, it gets easier. So it's like working out a muscle, asking for help is like working out. As you do it time and time again, it gets easier, but some days it's still a bit tough. And that was exactly the same thinking pattern, was like, I'm going to be a burden on someone else. The amazing thing is, if you're actively seeking help and you're an active participant, at least in my experience, in your own recovery, or you're trying to get well, asking for help isn't a burden on others. It gives people purpose. And these days, when someone calls me or gets in touch because they're going through something similar, which does happen, that brings purpose and joy into my life, because I get to pass along things that were really freely given to me, and I get to see the joy in someone else's life as they just have that recognition of, like, I'm not alone. That gives me purpose. That gives me a lot of self-esteem. So asking for help is actually an opportunity for someone else to have that purpose and self-esteem. It's not a burden.
What was you said you had one mate who asked you a really important question of whether you were going to take your own life. What was the reaction of your other mates? Were they entirely supportive? Did they not understand, but they were willing to back you with everything? What was their reaction to you reaching out?
Most of them were like, quite a few were very supportive and good at being supportive. So they knew how to talk. They knew how to listen even when they didn't have an answer or know what something was like from an experience perspective. A fair few were like, that's cool, we support you. I have no idea what else to do. And like, you see the kind of deer in the headlights look, and that's okay. And look, I certainly had a few people who were like, oh, you're not an alcoholic. You just like having a beer or something like that. Like, you have those people. And frankly, as I went through that recovery journey, particularly once I got to that place where I was like, this has to be the most important thing in my life. Like, I can't keep trying to phone it in and do this half-ass. Like, I need to get sober or else I'm going to die. I did have to, sometimes for a period of time and sometimes completely cut people out of my life. With that disease in particular, you do pick up some acquaintances who are, you hang out because you drink and you use in the same way. And those are typically the relationships that I don't have now. I don't miss them. I hope for many of those people that they find what they're looking for, whether it's what I have or not. But the people who are your true sort of mates, of which I have many, I'm really blessed to have a lot, they will stick through you. It might just look a little bit different. You might have to step back from, I had to step back from the pub for about 6 or 8 months, where I just couldn't go into one. And now these days I still don't, I certainly don't hang around the pub every weekend, but if I'm going in and having a feed or a counter meal with the boys or something like that, that's perfectly sweet these days. But that's because I've got, a few years of sobriety, and a little bit more calm inside myself. But early on, I had to be quite ruthless with the influences around me.
Rhys, recently you wrote an article and you published it, and it's titled, "Aren't you scared that if you talk about addiction and mental health at work, it will damage your career? No, and here's why." It's a really powerful piece of writing that we shared on our Line and Length social pages. And it's probably the reason, after reading it, it's the reason we got you on this podcast. What's the the idea and the motivation behind writing that and publishing that?
Yeah, when I first started talking about mental health in the workplace, because frankly I got a bit annoyed. So I would hear external speakers, or I'd hear leaders sort of stand up and say, mental health's important, yada, yada, yada. And it's important because, my sister's cousin's boyfriend has had an experience with depression or something like that. And I get that not everybody wants to make a choice to be open about their challenges. But if we, think about the statistics behind mental health, and they're pretty easy to access, and I won't get into them because I'm not a mental health professional. I'm just someone with lived experience. That kind of just didn't resonate with me. I wasn't hearing people talk about this stuff, from their own experience, and it just didn't resonate with me. And eventually I was sitting down and I suddenly realized, like, if I wanted this to happen and I wanted to see people do it, I just had to do it. And I had what is essentially a leadership role because of my expertise. So, I was seen as an expert in an organization, and that's what I was introduced as and such. And eventually I just turned around and said, I'm going to talk about it. And I did that, and the response was overwhelming. I kind of went into it with a mentality of, like, if it helps one person, it's worth it. No matter what happens, no matter what consequences, that is worth it. And, there were no negative consequences for me. And it helped a lot more than that. So right from the get-go, it became worth it. But I wrote about that because I just saw, I'd occasionally field that kind of question, like, aren't you scared that this is going to impact your career? And eventually I went, well, if someone's not going to hire me or give me a job or whatever it might be because of my mental health, I'm probably not going to see eye to eye with that person on values. And that's cool. Like, they might just have a different perspective. They have a different view in the world, but I'm probably not going to want to work with them too much. So it kind of, it filters people out, but it filters out people I don't want to work with anyway. So that's kind of cool, actually. It's helpful. And then at the end of the day, it helps people. And, work is this weird thing that we all do so that we can get money to go and buy, necessities, but also weird other nonsense like Netflix subscriptions. And I just love the idea that people can go to work and not have to hide the truth about who they are. Whether that's the challenges that they face around mental health, whatever the hell it is. And not everybody needs to do it. Some people just have a different view of their privacy. But if people do, I want them to know that that's okay. And, if someone sees what I've done and that gives them that opportunity, or it makes them feel like they're not alone when they feel alone, then that was 100% worth it to me. So that's kind of what's sat behind that.
In that article, myself having read Brene Brown's book, Daring Greatly, there's a quote that you've got in your article, and it's vulnerability sets others free. And I just love it. Can I get you to just elaborate on that a bit more? What's vulnerability sets others free?
Yeah, I've read a lot of Brene Brown's work as well, and she's fantastic around vulnerability specifically. But when I needed help, I thought I was the only person going through what I was going through. I thought I was the only person who just didn't have the willpower to stop drinking and using drugs. I thought I was the only person who, not intellectually, because I knew that people dealt with this stuff, but I just felt so alone. And, the first time I heard people talk the way that I just tried to talk a moment ago about what it was like, what drinking in that way is like in reality, not some pithy version from Hollywood, but like what it actually looks and feels like, and what that horrible place where you don't really want to be here anymore feels like. And also the hope that comes with hearing the fact that you can get from there, like, you know, that jumping off kind of place where you may not be here for too long, to a place where you're just super stoked to be alive. And, you know, I don't jump out of bed every day like full of joy, by the way. I'm absolutely not that guy. But, you know, when I span out, I have like a really good life. And hearing people talk in that way and share about that vulnerably, I just went, fuck. Like, it was just like breathing out the first time in, you know, 25, 27 odd years. And so that freedom that came with that identification and feeling like you belong, if I can play some small part in passing a little bit of that on to someone else, then that just makes, frankly, it just makes my life better. It's just worth doing for me.
Love it. I absolutely love it, mate. I can't, you know, speak highly enough of everything that you're saying right now. I'm a bit taken aback with words.
Thanks.
Rhys, you just spoke about how sort of the Hollywood portrayal of alcoholism is not as dark and gritty as what it really is in real life. What about the recovery? How long did that take? And you know, you said there were many stumbles and falls, but you kept getting back up on that horse. How long did it take you to get to where you are now?
Oh, well, I'm about 32, so it probably took me about 32 years. It's not. It really, you know, I'm sober about 2.5 years, absolutely without anything. I started getting sober seriously about probably 5 years ago, and the first time I sought help for a problem with alcohol and drugs was when that was 11 years ago. But I had a drinking problem from like 15, 14, 15. So there's a long period of not getting it right, trying all of the other things, trying to just drink beers, trying to delete every drug dealer's number that I had, only to scrounge around and find every bloody drug dealer's number that I had after I'd had, a few beers down the pub, something like that. Like, so I tried a whole bunch of other things first. There's no linear answer to that question. For me, I don't believe that I'll ever not be an alcoholic and a drug addict. I'm just one that doesn't drink or use drugs at the moment. And I don't, my plan is not to go back to doing that. I really don't want to do that. But statistically, a lot of people do at some point in their lives. So, really for me, it's about maintenance of my mental health and my, my spiritual sort of condition and things like that. And that takes constant work. The good thing is that constant work makes my life amazing, and it makes me a much nicer person, frankly, than I was. And if you want self-esteem, you just do esteemable things. I can look in the mirror because I haven't knocked anybody out in years. I haven't drove a car into a telegraph pole in years or any of that kind of stuff. So it's a lot easier to look yourself in the mirror when you don't do bad shit all the time. But as it pertains to sort of recovery from drugs and alcohol, I think it comes back to just keep trying. I know, like, I'm lucky enough to know a lot of people who have got sober and stayed sober for a long time. And some of them did it. One of my best mates did it when he was like 25. Like, the amount of courage to go out and do something like that is phenomenal. But there are other guys who come in and have gone way further down the scale into, really dangerous stuff with heroin and ice, lots of time in prison, lots of time in, asylums. And, as I said before, the guys that you see on the park benches. And yeah, sometimes those people, they get sober and they go on to live good lives where they help other people and they save other people, frankly, from that kind of disease. So there's no set line of how long it takes. The only thing I've ever heard consistently and that I've always thought is it would, if I could do it quicker, I would have. I did it as quickly as I could. And I am very thankful for every day where I get to be sober. And I hope to continue that for the rest of my life because it makes my life so good. So that's the motivation to keep working hard on my own sort of mental health and my own well-being. But there's no guarantees,
Yeah. Are there other strategies that you use day to day to help you with your mental health that you can share with the people listening? I mean, obviously you set goals, big goals with the ultra marathons, and I understand that you're not drinking or using drugs, but are there other little things, self-discipline little things that you use day to day that you can share?
Yeah, 100%. I am ruthless about every morning and every evening I practice gratitude. I go through the things that I'm grateful for. Sometimes it's, it might take the form of prayer. Sometimes it might be just going through in my head if I can't do anything else. Sometimes I might be writing it down. But I practice gratitude. And for me, the practice comes first. I didn't feel gratitude until I was about 28 years old. And it's because I did that. And then the feeling came afterwards, not the other way around. So that's one thing. I asked myself consistently how I can be of service to others, like right down to walking into a meeting, walking into a podcast, like how can I be of maximum service to other people? Other things, like it's a constant battle, but eating healthy makes a huge difference. Sure. And aiming for progress. So I want to do everything perfect, right? So, you talk about a big goal. I want to get everything perfect all the way in the lead up to that goal or race or whatever. But there is no perfect. And if I aim for that all the time, I inevitably fall short. And then, the whip comes out and I kind of am pretty harsh on myself. That self-critic inside is pretty harsh. So reminding myself to just aim for progress, getting a little bit better each day, as opposed to fixing all the world's problems in, 5 minutes and then everything going perfectly, just helps me not to have such a critical voice. Those are sort of some of the biggest things. I use mantras all the time. Training and stuff like that, you tend to use a lot. I use a lot of those. And just saying positive things to yourself. And I mean, like, literally just out loud, I'll kind of just try and use a positive tone when I talk to myself. And even in things like, as I mentioned, the training and stuff like that, I can't run for 5 hours telling myself I'm a weakling. Like, that doesn't work. But if I go through gratitude lists in my head and think about all of the people who have helped me and who I love and who I care about, and if I tell myself I'm doing a good job, and I say things like, just one more step, you can do this. As corny as it sounds, that just adds up, and eventually you can do whatever that thing is, whether it's a long run or whether it's getting through a really hard day or whether it's going out and reaching out for help when you haven't done it before. Like, those little things matter.
I love it, mate. They are some really good strategies just to use day to day. I'm here writing them all down.
Rhys, what would you suggest for someone who is experiencing either drug or alcohol addiction, or is just they're not in a place where they think they're okay? What would your advice be to that person?
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, from a drug and alcohol specific perspective, if I was in that position, I would look at 12-step programs like AA and Narcotics Anonymous. I would look at rehabs. You could speak to your GP. So you can reach out to someone who you trust, who's maybe not in that kind of circle. I had a couple of mates, for example, who kind of had, they'd had kids and they'd settled down a little bit and they'd kind of got their stuff together. And so they were the first ones I reached out to about some of that kind of stuff, because they were just a little bit less likely to, be concerned about me and not be concerned about losing their drinking buddy. So I would explore all those options, and I would just keep doing whatever works. And if it's not working, try something else, but don't stop, like don't quit quitting kind of thing. And, more broadly, take a similar approach, like get on Google. Obviously, there are resources for people who are in crisis. And I think you guys probably share a bit of that stuff. And, if you're in crisis, there are resources and the police and all of these kinds of people to help out. But I would just sort of jump on Google and search for it, look for it, just keep going.
Solid advice, mate. I think that's hopefully people out there can, if you are experiencing any of this sort of stuff, you can reach out to anyone that Rhys has suggested, or your close mates or your family as well. Rhys, your mum was a mental health nurse. How much help was that, having your mum there to be able to kind of point you in the right direction?
Yeah, I think, look, I don't know what the other situation would have, she was the first person who pushed me into getting some therapy when I was having those symptoms of PTSD years ago. And she's been very, very supportive ever since. My dad's been really supportive as well. Both of my parents have spent a tremendous amount of time and love and care, looking after me. That said, my mum wasn't the person I turned to when I had to deal with alcohol and drug addiction. And my experience of families, I love my family dearly. They're fantastic. I'm incredibly lucky. But families, a good mate of mine jokes like, families push your buttons because they install the things. So sometimes when you're dealing with these challenges, it can be hard to go to your, maybe it's hard to go to your spouse, maybe it's hard to go to your parents or something like that. I was really, really lucky. Other people aren't so lucky. There are people who have come from family lives that aren't as safe and as loving as the one that I've had. And so I think, I just got lucky on that one, to be honest, mate. Like, I just won the lotto on that. And I'm lucky to have really good relationships, and they're very supportive of what I do now. But neither of my parents fully understand what it's like to be an alcoholic. They don't understand what it's like to be a drug addict. My mum has a very good understanding as a practitioner, which is incredibly helpful. My dad does what he can to understand and empathize, and we can see eye to eye, and he can understand me on many levels, and I him, but neither of them know what it's like to not be able to stop using drugs and keep using them when you don't want to. And so for that, I needed to basically meet people who did.
I think I think that's a really great comment about the family knows how to push your buttons because they're the ones that install the things. I think that's a great way of looking at it. I also think on the flip side of that, you actually have two families in life: the one that you're born into and the one that you get to choose. And the one that you get to choose is just as important, or if not more, because they are the people that become your support network, and you've spoken to that. They're the people that you call upon. And sort of the first thing you said is reach out to other people if you are going through other troubles, and sort of create that second family that is the one that you choose and the one that can help you support you, because they're not going to push your buttons. They know what you've been through, and they're going to be there to help. So I think it's an incredibly important point to raise.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. I couldn't agree more.
When you're sort of mindset preparing for your ultra marathons, running 300Ks or 100Ks, how do you get in the mindset of
that? Train, to be honest. Just train. Like, a big part of it is that, and you just have to get for me, I've just had to get really good at failing, basically, and being okay with that. I haven't run anywhere near as many races as I'd like to, because I kind of got into the sport and then COVID hit, and then I got 3 months of pneumonia, and I got a sort of slightly fractured-ish ankle at the moment, which is not great. Doctor says I'm not meant to run fully, but I'm in a running argument with my doctor about it. But it's been a matter of 2 steps forward, 1 step backwards, 2 steps forward, 3 steps backwards. And I've treated it much like recovery. And now the way that I kind of handle everything in life, which is, just keep going. Like if your ankle's busted, okay, what can you do? All right, I can still use a ski erg, or I can still use something else to train. And so try and keep that sort of cadence and consistency is sort of a major part. I mean, look, if you want to run 300 Ks, you just got to run at the end of the day. Like, doing strength and conditioning work is great, and I do a lot of that stuff, more than probably the average runner. I'm also about 93 kilos, so that's probably a bit more than the average runner as well. But yeah, a lot of it is just down to running, and then your mindset kind of comes with that. So, you don't think you can do a 20K run, and then you do it, and then you're like, okay, well, maybe I can do a 25K run, and maybe I can do a 30K run, and you're just kind of building that strength over time, and then you're finding tricks, whatever you can use. So for me, it's gratitude and service. On that 300K run, my focus on service was really simple. I went, all right, my job here is to be of service to other people. How do I do that practically? And it was like, when I go into a checkpoint, I ask how the people who are working the checkpoint are, like, how are they going, etc. When someone runs past me, I check in and see how they're going, and I ask them about their lives, and I listen. I'm not listening to talk, I'm listening to them. And you know what? That allowed me to get through a certain period of time without just thinking about myself. So it comes, your mind kind of builds, and your mindset builds with your physical training. And if you can focus on that as well, and kind of look at how am I thinking during a workout, or what kind of mental patterns am I going through, during different types of workouts, what kind of strategies are working, what isn't working, and obviously do heaps of research, like listen to other people, read extensively. Don't just look at one thing and say, like, I can only learn from this. Like, there's a business person over here who you can learn from. There's a woman who survived an abusive relationship and had the courage to get out and leave and protect her family in that way, who you can learn from. And so just finding those sources of inspiration, but also practical kind of, I suppose you could call it practical inspiration. Like, what do you do to be like that person, and to if you want what they have, do what they do kind of mentality, and then just try it out. It's like an experiment. You just experiment all the time with everything, including your mindset.
Rhys, I've got this is always a fun question to ask, and it's kind of a tough one as well. Looking back, if you could give yourself advice for when you were 18, 17, 19 years old, what piece of advice would you give yourself?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't think I would give myself any advice because heaps of people gave me advice and I've never listened to it, really. I would honestly just be there for that person. I would try and listen to them and let them talk without judging them. Sometimes I'm as guilty of this as anybody else, but we can be very quick to jump to solutions, like, you need to do X, you need to do Y. Sometimes people just need to be heard, to feel like they have a voice, to feel like that's okay. And if I had the chance to sort of go back and talk to myself at 18 or 19, I'd probably just ask, like, how are you going? What's going on? Do you want to talk about it? And just sit there and listen openly and try and reserve judgment and not fix them. And then when they, if I'd have turned around at that point and sort of said, yeah, actually, I do want to get some help. Like, yeah, I do want to become an active agent in my own recovery and my own mental health. That's when, I might have been receptive to solutions. But, mate, when I was 18 or 19, nobody could tell me anything anyway. So I don't think advice would have done well, even from me. I just would have thought I was a seedy, creepy old guy with a beard.
Mate, as a final question, we're going to roll into, what's this podcast experience taught you about yourself?
Oh, it's just reinforced how much I love talking about this stuff. I mean,
yeah, good.
It's so, I love a lot of typically like blokey things. I like the footy, I like sport, all of that kind of stuff. And the chat that goes with all of those things is great. And I like hanging out with the guys, and I like, just having a yarn and talking absolute dribble. But this stuff really lights me up because I know how important it's been to my life. And I see, I get to see you guys and how stoked you are to be talking about this and bringing this kind of awareness and honesty through the platform and through the sort of space that you're giving to people like me, but also like really other cool guests who have got amazing stories. And it just reinforces how passionate I am about seeing the lights come back on in people's eyes. When someone who's having a really rough time, you see them start to come back to life, whatever it is that they're dealing with. It just brings home how important that is and how much it's worth it. The work you guys are doing is just absolutely cracking, because that's what it brings to people. It gives them that chance to identify, to not feel alone, and bring that light back behind their eyes. And that's just cracking. So yeah, good job, guys.
Jeez, that's love hearing that so much. Hearing you talk, Rhys, I just want to say, like, hearing you talk so openly and honestly about like addiction with drugs and alcohol, who you remind me of, and I'm going to say this name, but you're also complete polar opposites in terms of life at the moment. But hearing you talk, you remind me of Ben Cousins. And I mean that in terms of, he has had that obsessive nature with like training and everything he did. He had to be meticulous about it in terms of his AFL training. And, he didn't get sober. He didn't stop the drugs. He didn't stop the alcohol, and to which he was addicted to. And you can see how sad that life's turned out for him now. But by you making such a bold choice to go sober from both drugs and alcohol for so long, it's just, to me, it's sort of like what you could have gone down that avenue, and thank God you didn't.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's not uncommon for people who are kind of, a bit obsessive, like my personality, I'm not just an addict, but I'm definitely an addict. Like, that's not the only thing I am, but that's in there. And that can easily come out and be applied to other things. It can be applied to work. It can be applied to sport. I think the key thing for me today is to keep that in balance and to look at my motivation and intentions. Like, am I doing something because I will only feel okay if I'm the absolute best, at growing a business, or I'm the absolute best at running and doing this kind of stuff? And for me, that's a really unhealthy place, even if what I'm doing is a healthy activity. But if I'm doing it because it brings me joy and I'm keeping it in balance, then, I think that's reasonable, and I can apply the elements of my personality, which, are a little bit extreme, in a way that is effective and healthy and helps others. Whereas for years I didn't do that. But like the amount of people I know who are elite performers in some discipline, you know, barristers, CEOs, you know, elite sports professionals, elite military, who have had or are going through this stuff is phenomenal. I certainly don't think that every addict or alcoholic is like that, but there's definitely like a group that kind of sit in that bracket of high performance, but really serious downsides in terms of addiction. And you know, on paper, those people have great lives because they've got heaps of money and they're professional sports stars, whatever it is. But, you know, my guess, and that's all I can do is guess, is that their internal experience may well be something like what mine was, which is it doesn't matter how much shit you got on the outside. You know, if you don't want to be here anymore, if you're in a really dark place, that's a horrible place to be, and nothing else external matters. So those people, like the guy laying on the park bench, or like anybody else with drug or alcohol addiction or other mental health challenges, I just help they get the help that they need, because you know, the pain doesn't discriminate based on how much you earn or what your job title is or how good you are at footy.
Yeah. Geez, I've loved this podcast. I want as many people to listen and hear it as possible because it's powerful. It's powerful stuff.
I think on that is a really nice place to kind of leave the podcast off. Rhys, thank you so much. That was such an incredible story that you've told, and I appreciate you feeling comfortable enough to come on here and have a chat with us about it. Yeah, it's been great, mate.
Yeah, thanks, boys. It's been absolutely cracking, as I said, and I'm just so stoked at what you guys are achieving and what you're getting after. So keep up the fantastic work, and I'm happy to help out however I can.
Look forward to it, mate. Look forward to it.
That's it from us here at Line and Length. If you want to join the podcast, please reach out to myself or Kel's. We're happy to have a chat with anyone, and we create a great space for you to be able to talk about whatever story you would like to share. And we hope you look forward to the next episode of This Is Your Line and Length.
And hit subscribe.
This episode of This Is Your Line and Length was brought to you by Picker Financial Solutions. Picker Financial Solutions can help you with your financial well-being. This includes restructuring your finances, purchasing your first home, or purchasing an investment property. To reach out to Picker Financial Solutions, see the links in this episode's notes. If this podcast has made you realize that you or a friend would benefit from having a chat, please don't hesitate to reach out to experts like Lifeline, Beyond Blue, or a medical professional. In the meantime, take care, look after your lid, and look forward to the next episode of This Is Your Line and Length.